The night we were called into Appalachia Park, the forest looked ordinary from the outside. Pines stood like a jagged wall in the dark, their tips lost in a low ceiling of clouds. The September air was damp, heavy with that smell of wet earth you only notice when headlights cut through mist. On the surface, nothing about it screamed danger, yet none of us spoke as the convoy rolled past the empty ranger station. I was riding up front in the lead truck, scanning the tree line while the hum of the engine rattled through the cabin. My name is Captain Mort, and after 15 years of deployments, I'd learned to trust silence more than words. Soldiers can joke about anything: bad food, bad orders, bad luck. But when men sit quiet, it means they feel something coming. The park had been closed for weeks, though no one explained why. Officially, we were told about missing personnel, hikers and campers who hadn't returned. Unofficially, the brass gave us a simple order: secure the perimeter, investigate, and keep the press out of it. That alone told me the situation was worse than it sounded. Our radios buzzed with static as we cut deeper along the service road. The signal had been clear when we left town, but by the time we reached the Rangers checkpoint, it was like trying to listen through broken glass. Corporal Lane, sitting behind me, tapped his headset and muttered, "Feels like we're driving into a black hole, sir." I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on the forest. The pines pressed close on either side, their trunks rising like pillars, shadows shifting in the dim wash of our headlights. At certain turns, the fog seemed to thicken so quickly it was like driving into smoke. We pulled into the first clearing around midnight. It was supposed to be a ranger camp, but the place looked deserted. Tents half collapsed, gear left scattered, coffee mugs still on the folding table. Nothing burned, nothing broken, no signs of a fight, but no people either. The stillness had weight, like the entire clearing was holding its breath. "Jesus," Sergeant Kip muttered as he swept his flashlight across the camp. "They left in a hurry." The beam caught a kettle, still hanging above an ash-cold fire. It hadn't been doused with water, it had simply gone out on its own. Private Hensley stepped closer and crouched near the table. "Sir, check this out." He pointed at a notebook lying open, pages fluttering in the damp air. The last entry was jagged, written in haste. "Something in the tree line. Watching movement after sundown. Can't." The final word trailed off into a line of ink that streaked halfway down the page. I told Hensley to bag it, though part of me knew we wouldn't get answers from the scribbles of a frightened ranger. Fear has a way of turning shadows into monsters. Still, I felt the back of my neck tighten as I looked into the woods beyond the camp. The fog swirled between the trees, and for a moment, I could have sworn something shifted out there. Something tall, moving in silence. We set up a perimeter while I called in the first report. The radio spat static and half words. I gave up after the third attempt. We were cut off like the forest had swallowed the signal whole. Around 200, we began hearing noises. Not animals, not the usual scurry of raccoons or owls. These were heavier, deliberate, like footsteps circling just beyond our lights. Every time a soldier swung a flashlight, there was nothing, just mist clinging to bark and branches. Corporal Lane whispered to me, "Sir, I swear I saw a figure standing between the trees." I told him to keep his weapon low unless he had confirmation. Truth was, I'd seen it too. A darker shape in the fog, gone the second you tried to focus on it. By 0300, we knew we weren't alone. The Rangers hadn't vanished by accident. Something was moving through Appalachia Park, and it was waiting for us. And that's when we heard the first scream, far off but sharp enough to cut through the trees. It carried across the clearing, echoing unnaturally, like it didn't come from one throat but several. Every man froze where he stood, eyes fixed on the black timberline. I felt the weight of their stares turn to me, waiting for orders. My gut told me that whatever had taken the Rangers had just announced itself. "Form up," I said, gripping my rifle. "We're going in." And with that, we left the safety of the clearing and stepped into the dark mouth of the forest, where the real story of Appalachia was waiting to begin. The forest closed in around us the moment we left the clearing. Our flashlights carved narrow tunnels through the fog, beams catching wet needles, slick branches, and the faint shimmer of spider webs strung between trunks. Every step sounded too loud, boots sinking into soft earth, gear shifting, rifles brushing against straps. Yet outside our little circle of light, the woods stayed silent. No owls, no crickets, not even the low hum of wind. "Feels wrong," Sergeant Kip muttered behind me. "Like the forest knows we're here." He wasn't wrong. I'd been in enough jungles, deserts, and mountains to know what silence usually meant. Predators, storms, ambush. But this quiet wasn't natural. It pressed in on you, like stepping into a room where someone had just stopped speaking. We moved in 2 staggered columns, 5 men each. Lane and Hensley were on point with me. Kip handled the rear, the others spread between. Standard formation, but our spacing was tighter than doctrine. No one wanted to drift too far from the light. As we pushed deeper, my thoughts kept circling back to the Rangers' abandoned camp. The cold kettle, the notebook with that half-finished sentence. In my career, I'd seen plenty of men break under pressure. I'd seen panic spread faster than fire. But this felt different. You don't leave a kettle hanging or journals open if you're running from a bear. And you don't just vanish without tracks. "Sir," Lane whispered, stepping close. "What exactly are we looking for?" I kept my eyes forward. "Missing personnel." He let out a humorless chuckle. "Yeah, but missing from what?" I didn't answer. Orders were clear. Investigate, secure, report. What wasn't clear was why the National Guard was called into a park that should have been handled by state police. Something had escalated. Something had scared people higher up the chain. We stopped at a fork where the trail split in 2 directions. North toward a ranger fire tower, east toward an old logging site. I gave the signal for a short halt. Hensley checked his map, red light glowing faintly on the laminated paper. "Fire tower's about a click that way," he said, pointing north. "Might give us a vantage." "Do it," I said. We moved again, single file now as the trail narrowed. The path twisted upward, roots curling across the dirt like the bones of something long buried. My calves burned as the incline grew steeper, mist thickening with every step. Halfway up, Corporal Jennings, one of the quieter men, murmured, "Anybody else smell that?" We halted. I sniffed the air. Damp earth, pine sap, the faint metallic tang of rust. But underneath there was something sour, almost like meat left too long in the sun. "Probably a dead deer," Lane said quickly, though his voice lacked conviction. I gave the signal to keep moving. The smell followed us, clinging thicker the closer we climbed. By the time we reached the ridge, some of the men had scarves pulled over their noses. The fire tower stood like a skeleton against the sky, its frame half shrouded in fog. The wooden steps groaned under our boots as we climbed, rifles slung, every man on edge. At the top, we spread out across the small platform. From there, Appalachia stretched in every direction, a rolling ocean of black pine, fog curling through the valleys like smoke. No lights, no towns, nothing human as far as the eye could see. Kip scanned with his binoculars. "Dead quiet," he said. "Not even stars above us. Just cloud cover." I keyed my radio again, nothing but static. It wasn't distance. We weren't that far from base. Something in this park was drowning the signal. Then as I swept my own flashlight across the treetops, I caught it. For half a second, maybe less, something reflected back at me from the canopy. Not eyes, not glass. It was taller, higher, as if something enormous had shifted just beneath the surface of the fog. By the time I refocused, it was gone. "Sir?" Lane asked. "Nothing," I said, though my pulse was racing. We descended in silence. At the bottom, the sour smell hit us again, stronger now, dragging us toward the logging site whether we wanted to go or not. The trail wound down into a ravine where stumps jutted like broken teeth. The logging camp had long been abandoned. Shacks collapsed, rusted machinery half swallowed by moss. Our beams crawled over splintered wood and twisted steel. That's where we found the first body. It was slumped against a wall inside one of the shacks, dressed in ranger green. His eyes were open, but his face was pale, mouth frozen in a silent scream. His hands clutched his own chest, as if trying to hold something in. Only there was nothing, just ragged, empty space where his ribs should have been. The men froze. Even seasoned soldiers aren't built for sights like that. "Christ almighty," Jennings whispered. Kip knelt, scanning the scene with a flashlight. "No blood trail," he muttered. "Whatever did this didn't drag him. Didn't tear through, just hollowed him. I crouched beside the body, forcing my voice steady. Bag him. Photos first. Hensley lifted his camera, hands trembling as the shutter clicked. The flash lit the shack in harsh bursts, making shadows jump against the walls. Each shot felt intrusive, like we were documenting something we weren't meant to see. As the men worked, I stepped outside, scanning the tree line again. The fog had thickened, moving in slow swirls as if stirred by unseen currents. The sour smell was everywhere now, stronger than the pine, heavier than the damp. And then I heard it, faint just at the edge of hearing, a low hum rising and falling like chanting. I motioned for silence. The men froze. We all listened. The sound wasn't mechanical. It wasn't wind. It was voices, distant yet deliberate, carrying on the air as if spoken from the trees themselves. Lane's eyes went wide. Tell me you hear that, sir. I nodded. I hear it. The voices faded as quickly as they'd come, leaving only the thick hush of the forest. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just a search and recovery mission. Whatever was in Appalachia Park was organized. It wasn't just instinct or animal terror. It had intent. I gave the order to move. The men filed out of the shack, glancing back at the ranger's hollowed corpse before vanishing into the mist. We didn't talk as we retraced the trail. Some clutched their rifles tighter, others kept scanning the shadows between the pines. Each step carried the same unspoken question. If one ranger was left like that, where were the others? The answer would come soon enough, because by dawn, Appalachia was going to show us exactly what had claimed its woods. We pushed east after leaving the ranger's body behind, keeping tight formation as the mist crawled thicker through the pines. The air grew colder with every step. Each breath hung in pale plumes before vanishing into the dark. My men stayed quiet, heads low, boots soft against the earth. Nobody wanted to disturb the silence, not after the chanting we'd heard. By the time the ravine narrowed into a hollow, the sun should have been rising. According to my watch, it was nearly 6 o'clock, but the woods hadn't brightened. The fog sat heavy in the trees, choking out light. It felt like we were locked in one endless night. "Sir," Lane whispered, "my compass is shot." He held it out. The needle spun in slow circles, refusing to settle. Hensley checked his own. Same result. Even Jennings' wrist compass jittered as though pulled by invisible strings. "Mag interference?" Kip asked. "Not this strong," I said. "Stay close." No one breaks line. We followed the ravine deeper until the ground sloped into a basin. That's when we found the second camp. This one was bigger, 5 or 6 tents, a central fire pit, cooking gear scattered across logs. But the scene wasn't abandoned like the first. It was wrecked. Canvas shredded, poles snapped, gear crushed underfoot. Claw marks tore across the tent fabric, wide and jagged, as if something with hands too large to be human had ripped through. The fire pit held only ash and bone fragments. Not animal bone. Too small, too fragile. Hensley bent down, picking up a cracked piece with gloved fingers. His voice shook when he said, "This is a jaw." Human. The men froze. I forced myself to look, to take in the truth. The fragment had molars, roots still intact. Someone had burned here, and not whole. Jennings muttered a prayer under his breath. Lane swore softly, shifting his rifle. Even Kip's jaw tightened. He was the steadiest of them all, but the sight worked under everyone's skin. "We bag what we can," I said. "Fast. Then we move." The men spread out reluctantly, collecting fragments into evidence bags. I walked the perimeter, sweeping my light across the ground. That's when I noticed the tracks. Large impressions in the soil, half smeared by damp earth but clear enough to measure. At least twice the length of a human foot. The stride was long, deliberate. Some prints pressed so deep they nearly pooled with water. I followed them to the edge of the basin, where they disappeared into the pines. My gut twisted. Whatever left them had circled the camp more than once. Then came the scream. It tore through the trees without warning, shrill and ragged, rising from the east side of the basin. It wasn't the cry of a man or woman. It was layered, as if several voices had been folded into one, shrieking together in perfect unison. The sound made my teeth ache. "Contact left!" Lane shouted, dropping to a knee. Rifles came up. Beams swept across the fog. The scream echoed, bouncing from tree to tree until it was impossible to tell direction. "Hold fire," I barked. "Eyes sharp!" The noise cut off as suddenly as it began. The woods fell back into that suffocating silence, leaving only the echo of our own breaths. "Sir," Jennings whispered, "I don't think that was human." I didn't argue. My own chest was tight, heart hammering. I'd heard wounded men, terrified civilians, even animals caught in wire. Nothing sounded like that, nothing alive. We regrouped in the center of the ruined camp. The men's nerves were fraying, sweat on brows despite the cold, fingers twitching near triggers. I knew we couldn't linger. "Form up," I said. "We head east, follow the ravine." We left the wreckage behind, marching single file along the basin's edge. The fog seemed to pulse with every step, curling low around our boots like smoke. Half an hour later, we stumbled on something worse. A body lay sprawled against the rocks, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, flannel shirt. His face was gone. Not torn, not eaten. Gone like it had been smoothed over with clay. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just skin stretched flat across his skull. Jennings gagged. Lane swore again, louder this time. Kip crouched, flashlight trembling in his grip. "No blood," he muttered. "No trauma." "It's like it folded shut." I forced myself to kneel, studying the corpse. The flesh was intact, sealed seamless as if born that way. But the hands were clenched, fingers curled into fists, knuckles white even in death. He hadn't gone quietly. "Sir," Hensley whispered, "what the hell can do this?" I stood, scanning the tree line. Not sure I want to know. The men looked to me for answers. All I could give them was orders. We covered the body and pressed on. Every few minutes, someone swore they saw movement in the mist. A tall silhouette slipping between trunks, gone when the light swept over it. The forest had become a labyrinth of shifting shapes, each one threatening to solidify into something real. Hours passed, though my watches still swore it was morning. The sun never broke through. It was like the park had swallowed time along with sound. Then deep in the ravine, we found signs of the missing rangers again. A trail of gear led us forward. Flashlight, canteen, a torn sleeve with the ranger insignia still stitched. The items lay scattered as if dropped mid-flight. We followed them until the ravine opened into a cavern mouth, yawning black against the slope. The sour smell poured from it like a living thing. The men stopped at the edge, staring into the dark. No one wanted to step closer. "Orders, sir?" Kip asked quietly. I stared at the cavern. My instincts screamed to avoid it, but protocol demanded otherwise. Missing personnel meant we searched every lead. "We check it," I said. "Two at a time, then the rest." I clipped a glow stick, tossed it inside. The green light sank into the dark, swallowed almost instantly. The cavern seemed to drink illumination. Lane muttered, "This is a bad idea." He wasn't wrong, but I raised my rifle and stepped inside anyway, Hensley at my side. The cavern walls were slick with moisture, veins of quartz catching faint light. Our boots scraped against stone, echoing louder than expected. The further we went, the colder it became, breath fogging the beams of our flashlights. And then the hum started again. Low at first, like vibration through the rock, then louder, clearer, voices chanting in unison, the same cadence we'd heard outside, now amplified by the stone. Hensley froze. "Sir, they're in here." The sound rose, pressing in from every direction. It didn't echo like normal voices. It resonated, as though spoken inside our heads. Then at the far end of the cavern, the light hit something. Carvings, dozens of them etched into the stone wall. Symbols I didn't recognize. Circles interlocked with jagged lines, runes arranged in spirals. Some were filled with what looked like dried resin, others gouged deep as if clawed. In the center of the wall, a single handprint, too large for a man, pressed so deep the stone had fractured around it. The chanting grew louder. The men outside shouted, their voices muffled by distance. "Captain!" Kip's voice boomed from the entrance. "Movement out here!" I yanked Hensley back toward the light. We scrambled out of the cavern to find the others forming a defensive circle, rifles raised. The fog was moving, Not drifting, not natural. It curled and twisted in deliberate shapes, coiling around the tree line like serpents. Something was coming through. And in that moment, I knew Appalachia Park wasn't just hiding something. It was alive with it. The fog writhed around us like it had weight, coiling between the trees, rising in thick tendrils that seemed to breathe. It didn't drift with the wind, it moved against it, curling deliberately, closing in like a pack surrounding prey. Kip had his rifle up, eyes narrowed. "This ain't weather, Captain." I didn't answer. My focus was locked on the tree line. Shapes shifted inside the haze. Tall, too tall, almost human but stretched wrong, like silhouettes glimpsed through warped glass. Every time the beams of our flashlights swept across them, they disappeared. The chanting hadn't stopped. It reverberated in our bones, a cadence that made the air vibrate, though the words themselves were impossible to grasp. Lane clutched his helmet like he was trying to block the sound from inside his skull. "They're in our heads," he muttered, teeth clenched. "It's not coming from out here. Damn it, it's in here." He tapped his temple with a gloved finger. I snapped him back with a sharp order. "Lane, eyes front. You lose focus, you die." That steadied him, but only a little. His hand still trembled on his rifle. Then the first rock flew. It came out of the haze, small but fast, clattering against Jennings' chest plate. He staggered back, swore, leveled his rifle. More rocks followed, pelting us from different angles. The mist made it impossible to trace origin points. "Contact," Jennings barked. "Hold fire," I ordered. "Don't waste rounds." The barrage stopped as quickly as it started. Silence fell again, thicker than before. Then we heard footsteps, not single, not scattered. Dozens, heavy, closing. "Back to the cavern," I shouted. We retreated to the cave mouth, rifles sweeping the mist. The chanting swelled, so loud it seemed to rattle the rocks. Hensley fumbled with a flare, struck it. Red light burst, cutting a small circle of visibility. For the first time, we saw them. Figures in the fog. They were tall, nearly 7 feet, draped in something that wasn't cloth, but hung in tatters, like bark peeled from trees. Their limbs were long, bending wrong at the joints. Faces hidden under wooden masks carved into crude human expressions. Eye holes black, mouths carved into eternal grins. There weren't 2 or 3. There were at least a dozen, maybe more, half shrouded in the swirling mist. The men froze. For one breath, no one moved. Then one of the figures tilted its head, mask grinning wider in the flare's glow, and let out a sound. Half laugh, half hiss. "Open fire," I ordered. The cavern exploded with muzzle flashes. Rounds tore through the fog, punching into figures that jerked and staggered, but didn't fall. The recoil thumped against my shoulder as I squeezed bursts, watching rounds spark against stone, shred bark like robes. But the things kept moving. Jennings shouted, "No effect! No effect!" One of the figures lunged forward. Lane hit it center mass, 3 rounds point blank. The thing staggered, then surged back upright, mask splitting down the middle like it was grinning wider. "Fall back," I roared. We pushed deeper into the cavern, flares casting jagged shadows across the walls. The chanting followed, echoing inside the stone. The sound twisted in impossible ways. It didn't just bounce, it overlapped, voices stacking until it felt like a crowd pressed in from every direction. The cavern opened wider the deeper we went. The walls rose into a dome, and at the center stood something none of us were ready for. A structure. It was built from bones. Human, animal, impossible to tell. Ribs, femurs, skulls, stacked into a crude altar 3 meters high. Symbols like the ones we'd seen carved into the stone were scrawled across the bones in black resin. Some still glistened wet. At the base of the altar lay the rest of the missing rangers. Bodies arranged in a circle, faces covered in those same wooden masks. Some were fresh, uniforms intact, others reduced to skeletal remains. Every one of them was posed with arms crossed over chests, like offerings. The men froze. Hensley nearly dropped his rifle. "Sweet mother of God," Jennings whispered. Kip scanned the circle, jaw tight. "Sir, they weren't missing. They were taken." I couldn't argue. My stomach turned at the sight. But worse than the bodies was the sound. The chanting wasn't just around us anymore. It was coming from them, from the rangers. Masks tilted in unison, their mouths hidden, but the sound poured out all the same. That same layered hum, vibrating the walls, drilling into our skulls. Lane snapped. He screamed, ripped his mask off, and fired into the circle, rounds shredding through bodies. Skulls cracked, resin sprayed. The chanting wavered but didn't stop. "Lane! Hold fire!" I barked, but he was gone, eyes wild, pulling his trigger until the rifle clicked dry. The chanting shifted. It rose higher, sharper, the bodies twitching as though animated by the bullets tearing through them. Then from the top of the altar, something began to rise. It wasn't one of the masked figures. It was larger, a shape uncoiled from the pile of bones, taller than the altar itself. Limbs too many bending like branches in a storm. Its body shimmered as though half here, half not, edges blurring in the flare light. The mask it wore wasn't wooden, it was bone, stretched into a long oval, hollow eyes glowing faint. The men opened fire again, desperate bursts sparking against the stone. The thing kept rising, filling the cavern, its bone mask head tilting toward us. I grabbed Lane by the collar, dragged him back as he screamed, "Sir, it's in my head!" "It's in all our heads." He wasn't wrong. The chanting had become a roar inside, pounding against thought, drowning sense. My vision swam. My rifle felt like lead in my hands. "Grenade!" Kip barked. He yanked one from his vest, pulled the pin, hurled it at the altar. The blast shattered bone, resin splattering across the walls, shockwaves slamming through the cavern. For a moment the chanting broke, replaced by a low howl that shook the ground. The thing recoiled, limbs flailing, mask tilting skyward as the cavern shuddered. Rocks rained from the ceiling, dust choking the air. "Move! Out now!" I ordered. We stumbled back the way we came, half blind in the dust. The chanting resumed, louder now, furious, echoing from behind us. Figures moved in the smoke, tall and bent, surging through the cavern like shadows given flesh. We burst out into the fog-soaked woods, lungs burning. Behind us, the cavern mouth glowed faintly red, as if lit from within. The chanting poured out into the trees, spreading like fire. The men collapsed in a staggered line, gasping, rifles shaking in their hands. Lane was sobbing, face buried in his palms. Jennings was whispering prayers again. Hensley sat pale as ash, camera still hanging from his neck, lens cracked. Kip spat into the dirt, eyes fixed on the cavern. "Sir, whatever's in there isn't done with us." He was right, because even as we caught our breath, the fog thickened again, curling tighter around our boots. And somewhere in the trees, something moved. Closer, heavier, deliberate. The hunt had just begun. The forest didn't wait. As soon as we staggered from the cavern, the fog closed in around us, thicker than before. It moved with purpose now, circling our position, coiling in shapes that rose and fell like waves. The air was colder too. Our breath came in short, white bursts, hands stiffening on rifles. "Circle up!" I barked. We formed a defensive ring, backs pressed together, rifles sweeping the mist. Every man's breathing thundered in the silence. My own heartbeat hammered in my ears. The chanting rolled through the trees, deeper now, as though the earth itself had taken it up. The ground vibrated with every note. The bone altar was behind us, but whatever rose from it had followed. Then came the first strike. Something lunged from the fog, a figure with limbs too long, mask grinning wide. Lane fired first, rounds tearing splinters off its bark-like covering. The thing staggered, then swept an arm across him with impossible speed. Lane flew back, rifle spinning from his grip, body crumpling against a stump. "Lane down!" Jennings shouted. I fired a burst at the creature, rounds snapping through its torso. It reeled, mask splitting with a crack, but didn't fall. Instead, it dissolved back into the fog, gone in an instant. Lane groaned, clutching his chest, armor dented. He was alive, but barely. Then 3 more shapes emerged, masks glowing faint, limbs dragging across the soil. "Engage!" The night tore open with muzzle fire. Rounds spat sparks. Fog lit in flashes of orange. The figures jerked and staggered, but none dropped. One collapsed halfway, then dragged itself forward on broken arms, grin carved wider in its mask. Hensley panicked, dropped his rifle, pulled his sidearm, firing wildly into the mist. One of the creatures surged past the ring, grabbed him by the leg. He screamed, boots scraping across the dirt as it dragged him toward the tree line. I lunged, caught his arm, braced with my boot. Kip and Jennings laid down covering fire, rounds shredding bark like flesh. The thing shrieked, a sound like cracking timber, and released him. We hauled Hensley back into the circle, his boot torn clean off, ankle bleeding through the sock. "Tourniquet!" I shouted. Jennings ripped one from his kit, cinched it around the wound. Hensley bit down on his sleeve, eyes wild, sweat pouring. The chanting rose again, so loud the ground seemed to shake. The fog thrashed like a storm around us. Then the trees themselves began to move. Pines creaked and groaned, their trunks bending against no wind. Branches clawed downward, splintering under their own weight. For a second, I thought the forest was collapsing. But no, it was leaning toward us, entire rows of trees bowing as though commanded. Kip swore under his breath. "This ain't a fight we win, Captain." He was right. If we stayed in the circle, we'd be swallowed. "Break formation," I shouted. "We move!" We grabbed Lane and Hensley, dragging them between us, and plunged into the trees. The fog followed, rolling after us like a living tide. We ran blind, flashlights jerking across trunks, branches whipping against our faces. Behind us, the forest roared, the shrieks of masked figures, the creak of bending trees, the endless chant reverberating in our skulls. Jennings fired blind into the fog as he ran, muzzle flashes strobing the path. Kip hurled another grenade behind us, blast tearing through trunks, shaking the ground. For a moment, the chanting faltered, but then it surged back, angrier. We stumbled into another clearing, heartbeats pounding, lungs on fire. A small ranger outpost stood there, a cabin half collapsed under rot. It wasn't safe, but it was shelter. Inside! We burst through the warped door, barricading it with overturned furniture. Jennings and I shoved a desk against the frame. Kip nailed shutters closed with his rifle butt. Inside, the air was damp, stinking of mildew. Papers littered the floor, maps curling yellow on the walls. But it was walls, at least, for the moment. Lane slumped against a cot, groaning. Hensley clutched his leg, face pale. Jennings hovered near him, whispering prayers, while Kip stood by the door, rifle ready. The chanting pressed against the walls like a storm outside, shaking the thin wood. Shadows slid under the gaps in the shutters, tall and warped. Something scraped along the siding, claws dragging in long, slow arcs. "They're surrounding us," Kip muttered. I forced myself calm, scanning the cabin. We needed options. A half-rotted trapdoor sat in the corner, chained shut. Maps on the wall showed tunnels, old ranger maintenance routes that ran beneath the park. "Jennings," I said, "check that trapdoor." He dropped to a knee, pried the chain loose with his bayonet. The wood creaked as it lifted, revealing a narrow stairwell sinking into dark. A gust of stale air hit us, thick with mold and iron. "Looks clear," he said. It wasn't clear. Nothing here was, but staying in the cabin meant dying behind rotten walls. "We move underground," I ordered. "Now!" Kip hauled Lane onto his shoulder. Jennings helped Hensley. One by one, we descended the stairs, flashlights cutting narrow beams into the dark. The tunnel smelled of rust and old water. Walls of stone and timber beams pressed tight around us, ceiling low enough to stoop. Our boots splashed in shallow runoff as we pushed deeper, leaving the cabin and the scraping above behind. For a while, the chanting faded. Only our breaths and footsteps echoed. Relief began to creep in. Maybe the tunnels would shield us. Maybe we'd put stone between us and the nightmare outside. But hope didn't last. Hensley, limping hard, whispered, "Sir, do you hear that?" At first I thought it was runoff trickling. Then I heard it, a faint whispering, layered, rising from the walls themselves. Not chanting this time, whispered words, dozens at once, all in languages I didn't recognize. The sound grew sharper the deeper we went. Jennings's flashlight swept the stone, and that's when we saw the carvings. Symbols etched along the beams, spirals and runes gouged deep, same as the cavern. Some dripped with fresh resin, glistening wet. The whispering rose. Lane whimpered against Kip's shoulder. Suddenly ahead of us, the tunnel opened into a chamber. Our lights revealed another altar, smaller but fresher. This one wasn't built of bones. It was built of uniforms. Dozens of ranger jackets, shirts, boots, and caps woven into a mound, stiff with dried blood. On top sat a mask, wooden but slick with resin, carved into the widest grin we'd seen yet. Hensley vomited against the wall. Jennings froze, whispering louder. Kip's knuckles whitened on his rifle. Then the whispering stopped, and in that silence we heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing in the chamber beyond. Something was coming down the tunnel toward us. We raised rifles, forming a shaky line. My throat was dry, finger tight on the trigger. From the dark, a figure emerged. Not tall, not masked. A man. His ranger uniform was torn, his face gaunt, eyes wide and bloodshot. He staggered forward, hands raised. "Help!" he croaked, voice cracked. "Please, get me out." The men froze, disbelief flickering in their eyes. But I didn't lower my rifle, because as the ranger stepped into the light, I saw it. His shadow didn't match. His body cast a man's outline, but on the wall his shadow stretched tall, limbs too long, mask grinning where his face should have been. "Captain?" Kip whispered. The ranger lifted his head and his mouth split wider than skin should allow, resin dripping from his teeth. Then the tunnel erupted in screams. The ranger's mouth opened wider, tendons tearing, resin dripping onto the stone. His scream came not from his throat, but from the walls around us, the tunnels vibrating with his voice. "Fire!" I shouted. Rifles thundered in unison, muzzle flashes strobing the chamber. Bullets tore into his chest, his uniform ripping apart, but the body didn't fall. Instead, the shadow behind him grew larger, swelling across the walls, stretching toward the ceiling until it dwarfed us all. The mask in the shadow grinned wider, swallowing the light. Then the ranger lunged. Jennings was closest. He caught the thing full force. They slammed against the wall, shadow spilling over him like tar. He screamed once before the mask grin slid down over his face, resin fusing it in place. His voice cut off, replaced by the same guttural chanting we'd heard in the woods. "Move!" I barked. Kip threw Lane down the tunnel, half carrying, half dragging him. I yanked Hensley to his feet, shoving him forward. Bullets didn't slow this thing. We needed distance. The tunnel shook as we ran. Behind us, Jennings' voice, no, not his voice anymore, joined the chorus. His boots scraped the stone as he followed, now one of them. Hensley stumbled, blood soaking through his bandage. He gasped, "I can't." "Yes, you can!" I hauled him by his vest, forcing his legs to move. "You stop! We all stop!" The whispering rose again, flooding the tunnel. My light flickered, beam cutting in and out. Every flash showed masks grinning from the walls, etched deeper than before. Some looked fresh, resin dripping like sweat. Ahead, Kip shouted, "Light!" The tunnel sloped upward. Faint gray shone from cracks ahead. The surface. Adrenaline surged. We burst into another clearing, this one ringed by jagged pines. Dawn's first light cut weak beams through the fog, washing the trees in cold silver. For the first time all night, I felt the air shift. The fog recoiled in places, burning faint under the rising sun. But we weren't safe yet. Jennings emerged from the tunnel behind us, mask fused, body jerking in unnatural rhythm. He raised his rifle with mechanical precision. Down! His burst of fire ripped through the clearing, rounds sparking off stones. One tore through Hensley's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Lane crawled for cover, face pale. Kip dropped to a knee, sighted, and fired a clean 3-round burst. Jennings staggered, chest snapping back, but he didn't fall. His mask split, grin widening. "Grenade!" Kip roared. He pulled the pin, hurled it straight into the tunnel mouth behind Jennings. The blast roared, collapsing stone inward. Dust and rocks swallowed the chamber, sealing it shut with Jennings inside. His scream echoed once, then was cut off by tons of falling earth. The silence that followed was deafening. I fell to a knee, chest heaving. My rifle felt heavier than it ever had, hands trembling. Kip dropped beside me, blood on his temple, sweat pouring. Lane lay gasping against a log, chest bruised, barely conscious. Hensley writhed in the dirt, blood streaming from shoulder and leg. We had survived the night, but barely. The fog still lingered, coiling at the tree line, but the first rays of dawn broke it apart, peeling it back like smoke. The chanting finally faded, leaving only the creak of pines in the wind. "Evac," I said, voice hoarse. "We get out now." Kip nodded. We half-carried, half-dragged the wounded, moving slow through the trees. Every step was agony. My head swam, ears ringing from the blasts. Yet the silence of the forest was worse. No birds, no insects, just emptiness. Hours later, after stumbling through endless pines, we reached the ranger station at the park's edge. The convoy was gone. Radio silence had left them waiting until dawn. Then they'd pulled out. Only one truck remained, parked crooked, door open as if abandoned in haste. We loaded Lane and Hensley into the back. I slumped against the driver's seat, forcing the engine to turn over. The hum of the motor was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The road out of Appalachia Park was long and winding, trees pressed close on either side, fog curling in pockets where the sun hadn't reached. Every shadow felt alive. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again and again, expecting to see a mask grinning from the bed of the truck. But nothing followed. When we finally cleared the tree line, sunlight washed over us in full. The park fell behind, swallowed in its own haze. No one spoke for miles. The only sound was the engine and the labored breathing of the wounded. Eventually, Kip broke the silence. "Captain, what do we tell command?" I kept my eyes on the road. "We tell them Lane and Hensley were injured during a training patrol, that we lost contact because of equipment failure, that Jennings is MIA. Kip stared at me. "That's it? That's all?" My voice cracked, but I forced it steady. "You saw what happened. You think they'll believe it? You think they'll let us walk free if we tell the truth?" His jaw tightened. He didn't argue. We drove on. By the time we reached base, Lane had slipped unconscious. Medics swarmed the truck, rushing him and Hensley into stretchers. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't volunteer answers. A colonel debriefed me in a sterile room hours later. I recited the lie I'd rehearsed. Training exercise, radio failure, one man lost in the fog. His eyes lingered on me, skeptical, but he signed the report. "Park is closed for further survey," he said. "Locals won't get near it anyway. We'll call it environmental hazard. You and your men are on medical leave." I saluted, walked out, and didn't look back. That night, in the barracks, I sat awake long after the others slept. The screams still echoed in my skull. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jennings' face split by that mask. I heard the chanting. But it wasn't just memory. As the wind rattled the barracks windows, I swear I heard whispering again, low, almost inaudible, rising from the floorboards. The sound of the park, it hadn't stayed behind. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Appalachia Park wasn't a place you escaped. It was a place that marked you, carried inside, waiting for the right darkness to return. I lit a cigarette with shaking hands and stared into the night, knowing dawn would come but never bring peace, because the hunt wasn't over. Not for me, not ever. It has been years since that night in Appalachia Park, yet I can still taste the damp air, hear the chanting buried beneath the fog. Some memories lose their edge with time. This one sharpens. On paper, it ended like any other classified operation. The official report says we lost one man during a night patrol. Lane and Hensley recovered from their injuries enough to be discharged quietly, though neither of them stayed in uniform long after. Kip and I were reassigned. The file closed, stamped, and shelved. But the truth doesn't live in those pages. It lives in the silence between them. I remember Lane's eyes in the hospital bed. He tried to ask if what we saw was real. I couldn't answer him. He died 2 months later in an accident no one could explain. Hensley left for the mountains out west. Never answered calls after that. Kip drank harder as the years went on. Every time I saw him, he looked thinner, eyes darting like he expected the fog to seep through the cracks of whatever room we sat in. The last time we spoke, he told me he still dreamed of the masks, Said they weren't dreams, but messages, warnings. He disappeared not long after, his house left unlocked, food half-eaten on the table. And Jennings isn't gone, not in the way Command thinks. I see him sometimes, not his body, not his voice, but his mask. Reflections in dark windows, shadows that don't belong. Once, standing in line at a gas station, I saw a man's reflection, smiling wider than his face allowed. By the time I turned, the space was empty. I've asked myself 1,000 times what we stumbled into. A ritual left unfinished? A curse born from the soil itself? Or something older, waiting for soldiers dumb enough to dig too deep? The park remains closed. They call it unstable land, dangerous for hikers. But I know better. Some nights I drive the perimeter roads. I stop the car, roll down the window, and wait. If the wind is right, I hear it. The faintest echo of chanting, carried miles beyond the tree line. Always the same rhythm, like a heartbeat, always pulling me back. And I think about the people who lived there long before uniforms and maps drew borders. Maybe they understood the forest better than we ever could. Maybe they knew some places are not meant to be crossed, no matter how much authority or firepower you carry. I've learned this. War leaves scars, but so does the unknown. We're trained to fight men, armies, weapons, not the darkness under the soil, not the masks that outlive flesh. When I speak of it, which is rare, I keep my voice low. I never use names. I don't want to see another comrade's face flicker into something grinning, but silence doesn't protect me either. I still wake at 0300 sharp, ears straining, convinced the fog is pooling under my door. So if you're hearing this now, take it as testimony, not warning. Appalachia Park isn't just land. It isn't just trees and trails. It's a wound in the earth that never heals. And once you look inside it, it never lets you go. We left bodies there, and not all of them were ours. The forest kept what it wanted. The rest of us, it marked. I was Captain Mort, United States Army. And if someday you find yourself near that park, listening to the silence that isn't quite silence, don't step in. Don't follow the mist. Because once it breathes you in, you'll spend the rest of your life trying to breathe it out. And you never will. You're still watching without subscribing? Make sure you don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and share with your friends. Tell us your country, the time you're watching, and any real-life incident like this, then post it in the comments.